welcome to another episode of Prodigy Search Presents. I'm Mark Resch Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. Today, I'd like to welcome Elisa Padilla, a longtime senior level marketing executive from Rock Nation, Miami Marlins, Brooklyn Sports, among others, which we'll talk about a few of those pit stops along the way. First and foremost, thank you for being here. I know you're very busy, so really appreciate it, Elisa.
Thank you so much for for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Of course. One of the things that when we were planning on today's conversation, and looking at your background, your credentials, your resume, all the things you've done, what I really like, and this is a takeaway, and it's definitely a recruiter nerd in me. I think it's a little bit of that, HR nerd in me. I love that it's not this straight path, right? And I mean, I pay that as very much a compliment, right? It's not the linear career path that everybody either has been told about or has tried to pursue themselves, right? So, one of the things I think I'd love you to jump into is, even if it's from a 30,000 foot perspective, is the winding road, right? And how you pivoted your career, you changed paths, changed directions, and some of those were chances you had to take, right? So I'd love to have you talk about that without the standard, I went from this company to this company, but talk about the winding road.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for making that a compliment. Half the people that I speak to frame it up as the negative. And the way that I have approached my career after I started my first job as a marketing assistant at the New York Knicks, and when I decided to go back to business school, and after my first year in business school, I really made the conscious decision to have a diversified marketing background. That was really important to me. I wanted to be able to look ahead a few years and say, okay, if I'm in a CMO position, I want to be able to talk about media. I want to be able to talk about Hispanic marketing. I want to be able to talk about marketing to Gen Z. I really wanted, it was a conscious decision. Mm-hmm. So once I got through graduate school and I started looking at opportunities, it was like, okay, I had been in basketball for a few years, a number of years. And I thought, okay, you know what? How do I go to media? And working for the #1 kids network in Nickelodeon wasn't too shabby of a job. So really understanding how to market to kids, programming, and took that one step further and took a position at HBO where I was focused on boxing. And boxing really gave me the entry to understand direct to consumer, because it was all about getting people to push, the cable button, Hispanic marketing, and really dual language marketing, because when we were promoting our boxing events, because so many of the boxers were Latino, we had to think about and approach the marketing in English and in Spanish. So that was an amazing tenure there. And at that time, the third screen, these cell phones started popping up, and I had the opportunity to go work at a technology / mobile company retail at AT&T, where it was really understanding how as marketers, we were going to use these phones to really drive business forward. So the greatest, when I think about my time at AT&T, what's really great about that experience was that I was able to lead the marketing efforts, Mark, to open up the very first company-owned store in Chinatown. And to have that opportunity, not only from a marketing perspective, a diverse perspective, but also from a brand growth perspective, was really special and unique. And that was actually one of the things that really moved me to the top when the conversation started with Brooklyn Sports and Entertainment. So, when I think about how I got to that point, I was always, the North Star was diversification. And, most recently I've had conversations where people are like, oh, you've jumped around a bit. And I was just like, no, it's not that I jumped around, is that I was strategic in my career path. And I didn't want to be at a place for 30 years, because then what value, was I going to bring to the next opportunity? Or, how was I going to continue to grow my own marketing expertise. So, when Apple called, it's like, who says no to Apple? And it was also it was a huge leap, right? I mean, Silicon Valley, not diverse. And I was like, you know what? I have to do it because they're not only a global marketer, but one of the things that was so incredible about my experience at Apple that I would have gotten, when I look at my career, wouldn't have gotten anywhere else, is the commitment of the people that work there to create products to enhance people's lives. So based on that experience, when I went to the Marlins, I was able to think about, okay, how are the Miami Marlins going to enhance that entertainment experience of our consumers? Which, not saying that I wouldn't have gotten to that point anyway, but the fact that I had this exposure at Apple just made me a better marketer.
It's fascinating, and I think the ability to jump in and out of sports, that's probably the most underrated parts of your background. And honestly, because that the value, and I think it's different now maybe than it was 10 or 20 years ago, but trying to bring an outsider into our industry is not always the easiest thing in the world, or making that transition. But the fact that you've done that, and again, I think there's lessons to be learned about what others are doing that we don't do in our industry. Not that we're not always the most innovative people, but we aren't always the most innovative people. So I can't have you not. Let's talk about New York and New Jersey, right? Because that was
Yes.
big undertaking, right? A lot of energy spent, a lot of time spent there, new venues, various moves. You're enduring, and that was a long tenure. It was a good tenure, number of years that you were there. So talk about the energy and the time spent in everything that went on in New York and New Jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. I briefly touched upon that in your first question because I knew we were going to dig deeper. So look, I joined the Nets in 2010 when they had announced that they were moving to Brooklyn. And it was a really unique time because the team was a tenant at Prudential Center, the home of the New Jersey Devils, and we were a lame duck because we had already announced that we were leaving New Jersey. Even the governor back then said, if they want to leave, they can leave. But we were still charged, Mark, with getting butts in seats, right? Because when you handle marketing for any professional sports team, that's how you're measured. So it was our day job was getting selling tickets to Prudential Center. And then our night job was putting together the strategic plan to move the team to Brooklyn. And when I tell you that the team that worked on that project, we put our heart, our soul, blood, sweat, tears into making sure that transition was flawless. I can't say enough about that. And from my perspective, when I joined the Nets, I was like, okay, we're moving to Brooklyn. What does the data say? How many season ticket holders are actually going to do the move with us or aren't going to do the move with us? And what information and what data do we have on Brooklyn itself? And that to me was just, I believe that data drives marketing decisions. So that was to give me visibility to say, okay, you know what, how are we going to approach this move? And after reviewing the data and understanding where we were from a brand life cycle perspective, the approach was, okay, we're going to go into Brooklyn as an expansion team. And one of the characteristics of Brooklyn Knights is that they're very prideful. They think they live in the best borough. They're better than Manhattan Knights. And they were also clamoring for a team to call their own because they hadn't had their own sports team since the Dodgers moved to LA. So based on all of that, the campaign where we introduced the team was titled Hello Brooklyn. And the reason, and it was actually, I took a marketing note from Apple. Apple, their design is so simple that it's so beautiful that it's complicated, right? So the simplicity of when you meet someone, you say hello. And Hello Brooklyn was a way for us to come into the borough in a very humble manner and use our brand voice from within the borough, so that the Brooklynites were welcoming us as their new team. And we saw success. I mean, tremendous, tremendous success. And one of the stats that I'll share with you that, when we learned after the brand transformation was we sat with our then the NBA retail partner, and they said, look, the Nats went from 31 to the top 5 in merchandise sales. And we were like, well, there's only 30 NBA teams. And the gentleman, who was leading the basketball division for Adidas said, well, the defunct Seattle Supersonics have sold more merchandise than the New Jersey. So to say that, how we saw Brooklyn embrace us, not only from a ticket sales perspective, a community perspective, but also from a merchandise perspective, was really, really it was just amazing. And when I tell you that, a lot of sleepless nights, but it was all worth it until this day. When I think I'm still, a Nets fan. I follow them on social, and, I'm very in tune with what they're doing. It's like I think back to the brand that we built, and how it has evolved over the years.
You talked about the merchandise sales. So this was, I want to come back to your experiences in Miami as well in a second, but an idea came to my mind. You're talking about both your experience in boxing with multicultural, but a moment ago you also talked about merchandise sales, right? And I think it was recent. I want to say probably in the last week or so. Fanatics talked about moving away from pink it and shrink it, right? That the old school way of selling your clothing to the women population of sports fans, which thankfully my wife I don't think has ever bought anything sports apparel wise that has been a very tiny size or pink. So I'm glad we're moving away from that. But let's go back to the multicultural side, right? Because clearly the Hispanic marketing side is near and dear to you, right? I'm curious, we've done some projects for the PGA Tour's Latino America Tour and the UFC's multicultural. And I think the reasons they were doing those searches was to try to find somebody who knew, who knew that population and could market and sell to that population, right? Is anybody doing that good right now in the Big 5 sports leagues? Any teams, any leagues doing it exceptionally well? Not even good, just are they crushing it or no?
No, Mark, I think that there is a lot of work to be done in that space. And, you can go back and forth and say, well, I'm reaching the Hispanic and multicultural market with my general market marketing. And the reality of it is that being Latina myself, is that I know the difference of when a sports team is speaking specifically to me from a cultural relevant perspective, than giving me their message, in their general market message. And I think that the biggest mistake, or let me rephrase that, I think that the biggest opportunity for teams and leagues is that they shouldn't approach multicultural marketing via translation. Yep. That doesn't work. Right. It's not a language thing. In Miami, what I learned, 73% Cuban population. In Miami, they speak Spanglish. So they toggle between English and Spanish. So from when we did the brand launch, it was our campaign name was Our Colores. So it was R, in English, and Colores in Spanish, but that was to reflect the market. So I think that that's the biggest area of opportunity. And look, I get it that budgets are tight. I understand that resources are, there's limited resources. However, I think that when you think of the growth of the Latino population, and yes, you have acculturated Hispanics or Latinos who live, and breathe in the general market. And then when they're home, it's all about their culture. So I get it. There's a lot of complexities there, but the one thing is translation is not the answer. And the other thing too is, I'll take this a step further, is when brands, teams, or leagues are built in creative, have the people in the creative represent the community that you serve. So even if you're running a commercial all in English, have Black, Asian, Latinos, young, old people in the commercial, because from a visual perspective, I mean, I think of myself, and when I started my career in sports, my first job, my first internship, no one looked like me. And it's even my first job. I was the only Latina within the organization. And, while we've made progress, there's still a lot more progress to be made. So I just think that there's a huge opportunity to grow that segment.
We'll talk about DEI towards the end, because I do want to ask you about that. And I think that even goes to the makeup of these organizations, right? I mean, are you hiring and somebody that looks like me, but they took high school Spanish, or you're actually hiring somebody that has the community ties, has the life experiences, and again, that's more of the makeup of the staff, but that changes the way you do certain things, the way you sell. So, talk about Miami. So we can't. I am curious about your time there, and I think I don't remember the exact timing. Did you come after the things? You were part of the brand launch, but did things already start prior to your arrival, and then you had to be okay? So talking about the community tie-in and everything, you like a little bit behind the scenes during your Miami tenure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll frame it up from a timing perspective. I joined the organization in June of 2018. The new ownership group had taken over October 2017.
Okay.
And the new ownership group worked alongside Major League Baseball in terms of logo development, uniform development. So all of that was done, sealed when I arrived. And my job was to work with the internal stakeholders to put together the brand launch of how we were going to introduce the new brand to the city of Miami. And one of the greatest things that I discovered as I was educating myself in terms of how they had landed on the logo, on the color palette, was that research had been done, and the inspiration of the uniform and the color palette had come literally from the city and the vibrancy of the city. So anyone who's gone to Miami, I mean, how whether you're on, South Beach, or whether you're in Brickell, I mean, the vibrancy of that city is incredible. So the fact that all of that was taken into consideration, and the logo is so beautiful, that, from our perspective, growing the fan base, it was okay, you know what, we have to start from the bottom up. And I'll give you a peek, under the hood, if you will. One of the things that was really, really important to us from a community perspective was growing the game of softball and baseball. And we would sit in these meetings and we would have conversations about, okay, travel ball is so important, travel ball is so important. And I was like, okay, well, let's take a step back. When do kids really start playing baseball or softball? And the experts in the room were like, oh, usually 4 or 5. And I was like, okay, well, there's our answer, right? Let's forget about the travel ball. Those kids are already too old for us. Let's start at the T-ball level. And we actually got consensus, and we put together the Miami Marlins T-ball program. And our first year, our goal was to sign up 100 teams. And we, the Miami Marlins, were outfitting the team by giving the kids T-shirts, hats, and then giving them the actual T-ball and the equipment. Everything was branded Marlins, so that we could be part of the league. And our first year, we signed up 132 teams. And the greatest part of that, so once we signed up the teams, we then worked with all our internal stakeholders in terms of, okay, how do we get players there? How do we get the mascot there to make it a bigger event, specifically for opening days of the T-ball program? But when I would get photos and text messages of, colleagues or business associates, on South Beach at the diner, and a little league team would come in and they would all have their Miami Marlins t-shirts. Like, that made me so proud, because those kids were not only playing a sport, but they were representing their home team on their t-shirts. And it was, for me, we were so infused in the community in such an authentic way that, it was a home run, no pun intended, that it's something that I'm really, really proud of.
So one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about today, about the Miami experience, your ties there, probably a lot of friends, that have remained with the organization. Obviously, that some of that core is still there. Obviously, the recent news of a new general manager, Kim Eng, and the importance that has across the sport, but also across our industry. How do you feel about that? Like, how when you heard that news, you're like, oh my, like, what was the reaction?
The reaction was literally, I'm like, there is glass everywhere in Miami, because the Miami Marlins have shattered another glass ceiling in sports. And what I can say confidently is, I know that Kim was hired for her experience, her expertise. I know that for a fact, because I know the group there well enough that I can say that with conviction. The fact that she's a woman and the fact that she's Asian American is just gravy, if you will, because now there are people, not only women, but men, Asian men, who can see someone that looks like them in a position that they probably could have never dreamed or thought that it was possible for them. So I think that I applaud the Miami Marlins. I applaud the leadership group, the ownership group. It is just such an incredible hire, and what it means right here, similar to what you said earlier in regards to when we talked about multicultural marketing, the people that are sitting in the boardroom. Here is an ownership group who took a chance on a totally different path than what is historically accepted in Major League Baseball for that position. And I wish her nothing but the most success. And look, I just know that she's trailing a blaze for so many other people, that my hope is that she's just not going to be one and done.
Yeah. And you're right, to a certain extent, be given the opportunity to fail and then pick, again, it's not, you're not running the Yankees with an unlimited budget and the biggest market. So, fail and then pick things back up and make it work, because you're right. Now we need, again, I know we have the Becky Hammonds, we have had female referees, we've had female assistant coach, right? There are certain ones where, but this is big time, right? But give her to really, let's play this out, not be a 1 year or 2 year thing. Like, let this be a really long-term thing. Give her a chance to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We cannot talk about leadership, right? We're talking about Kim, and so that's maybe a good transition, right? Let's talk about the leadership series that you want to inspire women in sports. So talk about a seamless transition from Kim to you, and inspiring, whether it be entry level, mid level, whomever, women in sports. I mean, talk about the leadership series.
Yeah, so you know what, Mark, 2020 has been such a difficult year for everyone. And as you know, I have been a victim of COVID-19. And back at the end of March, when I was furloughed, from Rock Nation, and after, 24 hours of digesting what had just happened, I remember, and I have to share the story because it's so pivotal to how the leadership series came to be. I was out walking my dog and I was like, okay, you know what? How do I flip this narrative? How do I flip this so that this isn't about me starting to pound the pavement in terms of finding my next opportunity? How do I make this, we're in such a funky time. We don't know what's going to happen with this pandemic. And you know what? I came back after the walk and I thought, you know what? IG Live is the hottest thing. So you know what? I'm just going to start talking to women, because based on my experience in sports, women haven't had the platform to tell their story. And I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, this just can't be, yes, it's going to be a casual conversation, but what are the pillars to the series? And it's rooted in education, inspiration, and paying it forward. So it's a 20-minute series where women, presidents, founders to coordinators to mid-level managers can tell their story. And at the end, the only thing that I ask everyone who has been on is that they provide 3 career insights. So that's the inspiration in paying it forward. And it's been amazing to see, number one, the feedback that I've received. Number two, the connections that I've been able to make between people that have been on. And number three is really a source of inspiration, right? To be able to see, a founder of a company talk about her journey, and whomever's watching could be like, okay, I could do that too, or to hear someone, who worked for the New York Jets, who transitioned from, the NFL to esports. And it's like, okay, well, you hear her story and it's like, well, I could do that too. So it's been really, really rewarding. And I've had, it's amazing. I've had over 67 conversations, and, I'm going to continue to do it through the end of the year. And I've started to schedule people for the beginning of 2021, because I think that during this time of so much uncertainty, to be a little bit of light in someone's day is really important.
I think what a lot of what you just said is very incredible. And while I think Wise has and always has is doing a great job and always has done a great job, and I think the SBJ Game Changers, same thing there. The more platforms, the better, right? The more opportunities to have conversations, the better. Have more people listening, which is critical.
Yeah.
I used to joke about the SBJ Game Changers. I think one of the early ones about 5 or 6 years ago, I went there with a colleague of mine who was a mentee, who was part of the mentor-mentee process. And I was probably one of like 10 males there. I'm not patting myself on the back. I just look around the room and go, why am I the only, like, these numbers aren't good. Like, there needs to be more of me listening. And that's all I did. I just took it all in, so I hope people go to that leadership series and they take it all in, and male and female, by the way.
Yeah.
Both sides, so.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've been, trying to figure out is, to your point about your experience at the Game Changers, we need the men who are in the boardroom to pull women in. So one of the things that's on the roadmap for 2021 is I want to infuse men into the conversation as allies, because I think that's really important, so I just want to make sure that I keep the balance of the essence of why this was started, and not diluted with putting with and moving away from the core essence of the product.
You mentioned something earlier about your career, right? And I think you said, I don't remember what job, or maybe it was most of the jobs, by the way, you said, when you were sitting in the room, that you weren't seeing a lot of other people that looked like you. And I'm curious about our industry, right? We talked about there's room to grow in Hispanic marketing, multicultural marketing. And that's from the people that are already doing the jobs in marketing and sales roles at teams and leagues. I want to ask a different question, but and it ties into your career. How can our industry better support women of color? I mean, that's got to be, and put them in leadership roles, and again, give them opportunities, teams, leagues, agencies, whatever it may be, because there still is a diversity issue there. I'd say our industry is getting better at, hiring and promoting females, but there still is the women of color issue that hasn't been, not even fully addressed, just not enough opportunity out there, right? What can be done from your perspective about women of color in our industry?
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, Mark, I think that when a job opens up, that the hiring manager has to look beyond their own network. Because we know, from a human perspective, forget about any job for the moment. From a human perspective, it's your instinct that you want to surround yourself with people who look like you, who think like you. So automatically, the first thing when a position becomes available, what happens 9 out of 10 times is you look within your own network. And I think that the first step has to be for hiring managers to look beyond their own network, and to really, look at the hiring pool with a different lens. And while I am a firm believer that yes, there's tremendous opportunity for women of color to be in leadership positions, I also am a firm believer that the best candidate should be hired for the job. But if you're not even in the pool, then you're not even being given a chance. So I think that that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you know what, like I'm always fascinated by the heads of ticket sales at teams. I'm like, how there are no women that know how to sell tickets? Like I don't get it, right? And there's only a handful of women who are in those positions. And then I think back and I look at, okay, who are the presidents, who are the CEOs? And I'm like, okay, this all makes sense. But it has to start at the top. And I think that unless people can say that they believe in diversity, people can say X, Y, and Z when it comes to diversity and inclusion, until they start walking the walk and start making a firm commitment to really widen the pool, nothing is going to change.
Is there anything else from the D&I, DEI perspective that jumps out at you about how we're doing this, nowadays, not even just this year, but nowadays? I mean, clearly it's been more of a topic. There's been better hires in terms of chief diversity officers, and maybe eventually there will be departments that grow out of that because they're not there yet. But just to kind of ask a 1A to that question about D&I or DEI issues, are you paying attention to anything else other than just the hiring of diverse candidates and those type of, what else are you following?
Yeah, the other thing that I'm following is, okay, so you hire a chief diversity officer. Okay, are you checking the box or are you implementing employee programs? What is your training around D&I? Because you can hire someone who checks the box, but unless you're empowering them to really make change within the organization, it's the point is mute. So that's the other thing that I've been watching. And the other thing that I've been watching too is, based on all the social injustice that happened earlier this year, is the commitment of companies that have committed certain amount of dollars, whether it's to minority organizations or to entrepreneurs, whatever their commitment has been, which Forbes published a pretty extensive list, to see if that commitment is really coming to fruition, or whether that was something that was just said at the time and has just been put to the wayside. Because I really believe that you can say, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but you can say that you believe in X, Y, and Z, but until you walk the walk, nothing's going to change.
You don't want to be either temporary or short term, right? That's not going to solve
Correct.
anything either.
Correct.
I'm going to use a pun since it's, you used the home run pun earlier. So I'm going to throw you a curveball. What's next in your career, right? So you mentioned COVID casualty from Rock. I mean, we're just, again, not that you need to commit to anything right now, but what are you kind of eyeing up in terms of your next step?
Well, I would love to be in a CMO role again. I love, from a consumer marketing perspective, I love the storytelling. I love the building of community. And I know that post-COVID, digital and content development is going to bubble up to the top of the marketing funnel. So with my own project, my leadership series, I have been developing, content skills that I didn't have prior to COVID, which I'm very proud of. And from building community is also something that I'm keen on. So, I'm hopeful that when things turn around, I have an opportunity to be in that CMO role again, whether it's at a team level or whether it's at a startup. However, one thing that I will say is that I'm just grateful, to everyone who has been very supportive of me. And, hopefully when things turn around, I'll be able to, be back in the game, if you will.
Long overdue. It'll come. I think the industry is gonna rebound, and you won't be on the market for long. I know that.
Oh, thank you.
Listen, thank you so much for your time today. Continued success with the leadership series, obviously, and from a career perspective, good luck with the next chapter. I mean that sincerely. You will be swept up very quickly. So thank you
Thank
again
you
for your
so
time.
much. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your time. All right. Have a great evening. Thanks.